Did humans really domesticate foxes in ancient Siberia? It's a question that makes you think. We know dogs were the first animals humans tamed. They started as wolves, then became our companions. This happened a long, long time ago. People lived differently back then. They hunted, they gathered, and somewhere along the way, they brought wolves into their world. That's a story we understand pretty well. But foxes? That's a different animal. Foxes are wild. They're usually shy. They're not the first animal you'd picture living in a human camp. So, the idea of ancient Siberians domesticating them is really interesting. It makes you wonder how that would even happen. Domestication is a big word, but it just means changing an animal over time. Humans pick animals that have certain traits. Maybe they're less scared, maybe they're useful for something. Then humans breed them. Over many generations, the animals change. They become more used to people. Their bodies can even change. Think about a wild wolf compared to a pug. Both are dogs, but they look so different. That's domestication at work. It's not just about taming one animal. Taming is teaching one animal to behave. Domestication is changing a whole species. It's a process that takes a lot of time, sometimes thousands of years. It also takes constant human input. Humans have to keep selecting which animals to breed. They shape the animal to fit their needs or their way of life. For most animals, domestication started for a clear reason. Dogs helped with hunting or provided an early warning system. Goats and sheep gave milk and meat. Horses helped with travel and work. But what about foxes? What would ancient Siberians need foxes for? Maybe for fur, or maybe they just liked them. It's not as obvious as a dog pulling a sled or a cow giving milk. Foxes are not pack animals like wolves, they're usually loners. This makes them seem less likely to be domesticated early on. Their natural behavior doesn't point to easy cohabitation with humans. The main idea that humans might have domesticated foxes in ancient Siberia comes from a famous experiment. This experiment didn't happen in ancient Siberia, it happened in modern Russia starting in the 1950s. It was a scientific project. Researchers wanted to understand how domestication works. They used silver foxes, they took wild foxes and started breeding them. The only trait they selected for was tameness. They picked the calmest foxes from each generation, then they bred those calm foxes together. The results of this experiment are pretty amazing. They show how quickly animals can change when humans select for a single trait like tameness. This experiment gives us a peek into what domestication might have looked like in the past. It makes us think about what's possible, but an experiment in a lab is one thing. What actually happened in ancient times is another. Ancient Siberia was a harsh place. People lived by hunting and gathering. They moved around a lot. They had to survive extreme cold. Life was hard. So would they have the time and resources to spend on domesticating foxes? It's a real question. The story of ancient Siberian fox domestication is not a simple one. It's a mix of scientific findings and historical speculation. There's no clear answer. But it's a topic that makes you think about how humans and animals have always interacted. It makes you wonder about the long history we share with the creatures around us. The experiment that opened many eyes to fox domestication started in Russia in the 1950s. A scientist named Dmitry Belyaev led it. His goal was simple. He wanted to understand how domestication changes animals. He chose silver foxes because they were easy to breed in captivity. Also, they are still quite wild. So, he had a good starting point for his study. He started with a group of foxes that were all very wild. They bit, they were scared, they tried to escape. This was important because he wanted to see change happen. Belaev's method was straightforward. He didn't pick foxes for their size or their fur color. He only picked them for one thing: how they reacted to humans. In each generation, he tested the foxes. He would put his hand near them. He would try to touch them. Some foxes would snarl and bite. Some would run away, but a very small number, would be a little less scared. They might not bite as hard, or they might just hide instead of attacking. These were the foxes Belyaev chose to breed. This was the only rule: breed the calmest ones. Over generations, something incredible happened. The foxes started to change. At first, it was subtle. They were less aggressive. Then, they became more tolerant of humans. After about 10 generations, Belyaev's team, including Lyudmila Trut, who continued the work, saw truly tame foxes. These foxes would wag their tails. They would whimper for attention. They would lick human hands. They acted a lot like pet dogs. These were not just tamed foxes, they were genetically changed. They passed their tameness to their offspring. This was the key. They proved that tameness could be bred into a species. But the changes didn't stop at behavior. The foxes started to look different too. Their Fur changed color. Many developed patchy coats, like a dog. Some got floppy ears. Some got curled tails, just like many dog breeds. Their skulls changed shape. Their breeding season also shifted. Wild foxes only breed once a year. The domesticated foxes started to breed more often. Their hormone levels changed too. Things like adrenaline and serotonin were different in the tame foxes. These are the chemicals that affect stress and mood. It seemed that selecting for tameness had a whole set of side effects. It affected their bodies and their minds. The experiment showed a link. There's a link between tameness, physical changes, and changes in the body's chemistry. Scientists call this the domestication syndrome. It's a set of traits that often show up together in domesticated animals. Things like smaller brains, floppy ears, curled tails, and changes in coat color. Bolieev's experiment showed this syndrome appearing in foxes just by selecting for tameness. It was a powerful demonstration of how quickly and profoundly domestication can alter an animal. It gave us a real-time view of a process that usually takes thousands of years. The experiment proved that it's possible to domesticate foxes. And that, it can happen much faster than we thought. It also showed that you don't need a specific use for the animal. Just selecting for tameness can start the process. This opened up new ways of thinking about ancient domestication. It made people wonder if other animals besides dogs might have gone through a similar process. It made the idea of ancient Siberian fox domestication seem much more plausible. It showed that if ancient people were consistently breeding the calmest foxes, similar changes could have happened. Now, let's think about ancient Siberia. It was a vast land. It was mostly covered by forests and steppes. The climate was very cold. Winters were long and harsh, summers were short. People who lived there had to be tough. They were hunter-gatherers. This means they hunted wild animals for food and clothing. They also gathered plants. They didn't farm. They didn't live in big cities. They lived in small groups. They moved often to follow animal migrations or find new resources. Life was about survival. Animals were crucial for these people. They provided food, fur for warmth, and bones for tools. The main animals they hunted were things like mammoths, reindeer, and wild horses. These were big game, but they would also hunt smaller animals. Wolves and foxes were definitely part of the landscape. They were wild animals. Sometimes they were competitors for food, sometimes they were prey. And humans and these animals lived in close contact, even if it wasn't friendly contact. They shared the same harsh environment. We know humans domesticated dogs very early on. Archaeological evidence shows this. Dog remains found with human burials, dog bones with cut marks showing they were eaten, or tools made from dog bones. These things tell us that dogs were part of human life. Dogs likely helped with hunting. They could track game, they could alert humans to danger, they were useful, so it makes sense that humans would have encouraged a bond with wolves that eventually led to dogs. This domestication happened over thousands of years. It was a slow process, but what about other animals? Were there other early attempts at domestication? It's hard to say. The archaeological record from ancient Siberia is not always clear. It's a huge area, it's remote, and the conditions don't always preserve things well. So finding evidence of human-animal interaction from that far back can be tough. We look for specific things. We look for animal remains buried with humans. We look for signs that animals were cared for or kept alive by humans. We look for genetic changes in ancient animal bones. The environment itself might have played a role. The severe cold meant animals needed thick fur. Foxes, especially red foxes and Arctic foxes, were common in Siberia. Their fur was valuable. Humans would have hunted them for their pelts. But could this relationship have gone further? Could some groups of people have started to keep foxes alive? Maybe they raised kits they found after hunting the mother. This is one way domestication can start. Humans bring young animals into their camps. If those animals survive and are less aggressive, they might be kept. It's also important to remember that ancient Siberia covers a huge span of time and many different cultures. There wasn't just one way of life. Some groups might have been more sedentary, others were highly nomadic. The interaction with animals could have varied a lot. Some groups might have had closer relationships with specific animals than others. The conditions were ripe for close human-animal interaction driven by survival needs. The question is, did this interaction lead to the domestication of foxes, similar to what happened with wolves and dogs? It's a big jump from hunting an animal for fur to selectively breeding it for tameness over generations. So, the idea is that maybe ancient Siberians domesticated foxes. Where does this idea come from? It mostly comes from connecting the Belyaev-Trut fox experiment with the archaeological findings in Siberia. The experiment showed that foxes can be domesticated. It showed that they can develop dog-like traits. So, researchers wondered if this could have happened naturally in the past. If early humans were somehow picking out friendlier foxes, could they have created their own version of a domesticated fox? There isn't a lot of direct archaeological proof, like we have for dogs. You don't find ancient Siberian fox graves next to human ones. Not often, anyway. You don't see drawings of people with leashed foxes from that time. This makes the argument harder to prove. But some researchers point to a few things. Sometimes fox remains are found in ancient human sites. But this could just mean they were hunted for food or fur. It doesn't automatically mean they were pets or domesticated. One argument comes from the domestication syndrome we talked about. Remember the floppy ears and curled tails? If we found ancient fox bones with these traits, that would be strong evidence. But finding such specific traits in very old, fragmented bones is hard. Bones degrade over time, and these traits might not always show up clearly in the skeleton. So, it's a difficult thing to look for. Another point for the hypothesis is the economic value of foxes. Their fur was incredibly important in cold climates. If humans were consistently hunting foxes, they would have had many opportunities to interact with them. If they found fox kits, they might have brought them back to their camps, maybe to raise them for fur, or simply out of curiosity. If some of these kits were naturally tamer and survived better in captivity, they might have been kept. This could have started a selection process, even if it wasn't intentional domestication. But there are also strong arguments against it. The main one is the lack of clear, unambiguous evidence. We have strong proof for dog domestication. We have less for foxes. If it happened, it must have been less widespread or less intensive. Dogs have a clear role in human society from early on. Foxes, not so much. What would their role be? Hunting companions, unlikely. Guard animals, maybe, but dogs are better. Pets, perhaps, but people would need spare resources to keep animals just as pets. The ancient Siberians lived on the edge of survival. Also, the Belyaev-Trut experiment, while powerful, was done under controlled conditions. Humans actively and consistently selected for tameness for many generations. Would ancient people have done this? Would they have had the same focused scientific approach? It's possible, but it's also possible they just kept some tame foxes for a while, and the process didn't continue for enough generations to lead to full domestication. It could have been a series of individual taming events rather than species-wide genetic change. Some scientists also argue that the changes seen in the experiment are a side effect of reduced fear and stress. When an animal is less stressed, its body can develop differently. The domestication syndrome might be a result of less adrenaline and other stress hormones. This doesn't necessarily mean humans were aiming for floppy ears, it means selecting for tameness had unintended consequences. So, if ancient Siberians didn't have a specific need for these traits, would the domestication process have continued? It's a complex puzzle with many missing pieces. The idea of ancient Siberian fox domestication remains largely a hypothesis. It's a very interesting one, though. So, did humans really domesticate foxes in ancient Siberia? After looking at the evidence and the arguments, the simple answer is we don't know for sure. It's a captivating idea. It makes sense in some ways, especially after seeing the results of the Belyaev-Trut experiment. That experiment showed us that foxes can be domesticated. It showed that they can change their behavior and even their bodies quite quickly when selected for tameness. This proves that it is biologically possible, but possible is not the same as it happened. When we look at ancient Siberia, the clear proof just isn't there. We have strong archaeological evidence for dog domestication. We find dog bones with human burials. We find tools made from dog bones. We see genetic links to ancient wolves. For foxes, this kind of solid evidence is largely missing. We find fox bones in ancient human sites, but these can easily be explained by hunting for fur or meat. It doesn't mean they were living side by side as companions or working animals. The main support for the idea comes from connecting the modern fox experiment to the ancient world. The argument goes like this: if scientists could do it now, people might have done it then, especially if they were interacting a lot with foxes, perhaps raising orphaned kits. If they kept the calmer ones, over time, a process of domestication could have started. This is a logical jump, but it's still a jump. We're relying on inference rather than direct archaeological facts. Another point to consider is the motivation. Why would ancient Siberians domesticate foxes? For fur, maybe, but they could get fur by hunting wild foxes. Keeping and breeding foxes would be a lot more work. For companionship, it's possible, but humans often prioritize animals that offer more practical help, especially in harsh survival conditions. Dogs offered a lot. Foxes, perhaps less so. This doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it makes us wonder about the driving force. The absence of strong evidence doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen at all. Ancient Siberia is a huge area. Its archaeological record is incomplete. Many sites are still undiscovered. Many old bones are lost to time or too degraded to tell us much. It's possible that some isolated groups did start to domesticate foxes, but the process never became widespread or long-lasting enough to leave a clear mark on the archaeological record. Maybe it was a sporadic attempt, maybe it happened in a few places and then faded. The debate remains open. The fox experiment gives us a powerful model. It shows us how domestication can unfold. It makes us look at ancient human-animal interactions with fresh eyes. It makes us consider the possibility. But without more direct, undeniable evidence from ancient sites, the claim that humans domesticated foxes in ancient Siberia stays in the realm of hypothesis. It's a fascinating thought experiment. It tells us more about the incredible capacity of animals to change and adapt, and about the long, complex history of humans shaping the world around them. It reminds us that our understanding of the past is always evolving, and there are still many mysteries waiting to be uncovered.